Well, of course, something that came from your career, and this is a genuine thing, and one of the reasons why I was stalking you online for so long. It's you made this film called Dark City. Now, it didn't exactly break records at the box office, but
No, that's for sure.
it's one of the most beloved sci-fi films ever made. So I gotta ask you, what's that like knowing that out of the possibly millions and millions of science fiction films out there, that there's so many people that think that a film you made, Dark City, is one of the greatest ever?
Yeah. I mean, Dark City is like my it's like having a sort of a sleeper hit. It sort of didn't really, as you say, didn't do that well at the box office initially. But I started to notice like more and more people were asking me questions about it every time I did. Like I go to like a convention or do an interview or something like that, and do media for subsequent movies. More and more people started asking me questions about Dark City, and so it's grown. I think it's grown into a bit of a cult, like sort of a cult favorite, over the years. I don't know. It's one of those films. It's like maybe it was a bit ahead of its time. It touched on some ideas about fake reality that a few other films kind of subsequently did as well. But I think it was probably one of the first to sort of deal with that kind of thing. And in a way, that whole notion of what is reality and what is fake, fake news and all this sort of stuff that has become even more relevant really over the years in many ways. I'm making a movie now. My next movie is called The New Country, and it's kind of going back to some of those ideas, about alternate realities and parallel universes and some of the stuff that Dark City kind of seemed to touch on. And as I say, it seems even more relevant now in some ways than it did even back in the in the last century, which is when Dark City was made.
And for those wondering about The New Country, just before we recorded, Alex cast me in the lead, and I get an executive producer credit. So it's good to work with you, Alex. But of
Absolutely.
course, you said there that Dark City was ahead of its time, but barely a year later, this film came out called The Matrix. That at the time, I was so clueless when it came to films. I thought that The Matrix was a sequel because it basically was.
So did I.
So, what was that like when you went to see it, and everything from the lighting to the camera shots to the fucking costume designs to the score, that it was so similar to what you'd already made?
Well, it's not a complete coincidence. My producer, who I no longer work with, actually, one of the producers worked on Dark City and also suspiciously worked on The Matrix as well. And they got to see, Dark City was when we made Dark City, it was so poorly received by test audiences. You know how you do test screenings for films, right? Everyone has to do a test screening. We were received so poorly in test screenings. People had no idea what the fuck this thing was, that we had to actually go back into the cutting room and recut it. And literally, Dark City sat on the shelf for maybe a year or more after it was completed before they released it. I actually shot Dark City in 1996, in fact, and virtually it was finished it was well and truly finished by 97 and released in 98. And so, to my chagrin, this producer showed my film without my permission, of course, to the people who were making The Matrix, and they used, I think, a lot of the they nicked a bunch of elements. They even shot on. There was a set that we built towards the end of Dark City that they actually ended up shooting some of their stuff, some of the Matrix stuff on. It was my set. I designed it and I built it. And of course, all this stuff, you don't want to say this stuff to too many people. And I've sort of been mum over the years because people think of it as sour grapes. They go, oh, just Matrix did better than Dark City, etc. But there was a lot of borrowing of elements, to be polite, from Dark City, and I think that probably answers a lot of why the films are so similar. I think conceptually both films borrow from some other original sources, and perhaps that's a coincidental thing. But I think certainly from a visual point of view, there was very much of an influence, I think, on that, on the Matrix film from Dark City, and also from The Crow. In fact, The Crow. Let's not forget The Crow invented the sort of long trench coat, the leather trench coat, the leather trench coated superhero kind of character, as seen in Blade and The Matrix around that same time. So I think those two films have been very influential on others, whether the others admit it or not. Some do, some don't.